So here we go.
Okay. All right, sorry, had to get some water. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Nicole Norris. I'm a vice president at Spitfire Strategies in Washington, D.C. Spitfire is a woman-owned strategic communications firm that partners with nonprofit organizations and foundations to support and move forward social justice movements and causes. From racial justice to climate change to reproductive rights, police brutality, housing inequality, you name it, we partner with more organizations moving the needle on these pressing issues. My specific area of focus, sometimes both at Spitfire but also before Spitfire, has been around housing inequality and underserved communities. Specifically around how we need to partner cross-collaboratively to close the gaps in underserved and marginalized communities and close the racial homeownership gap, which is quite vast. Before Spitfire, I did some time at Fannie Mae, where I focused a lot on the racial equity narrative following the murder of George Floyd, and of course the pandemic, which shined a brighter light on the inequities that are really devastating communities that were already devastated before these events took place. And I also helped support their sustainable communities work. In this discussion, we're going to take a deep dive into the intersections of public interest communications and public interest technology. One may say, what is public interest technology? What is public interest communications? I know there are a lot of different terms that we use. For the layperson, if you were to Google public interest technology, a simple answer would be the study and application of technology and expertise to further public good. However, as people doing this work, we know that it is not quite that simple, right? Especially when it comes to creating standards and strategies to ensure technology and communications work together to advance the greater good for our society. With me today are some amazing individuals who are doing just that. So I want to go ahead and introduce Carlos, who's right here. Carlos is a civil engineer with 40 years of professional experience in disaster risk reduction, sustainability and science, technology and innovation in the academic, public, and private sectors. He is a director of engineering, technology, and design at Miami-Dade College and a founder, director of Geopolis International Network for Natural Disasters, Risk Reduction, and Environmental Risk and Resilience. He's a consultant for the United Nations, the World Bank, and the Inter-American Development Bank. Thank you, Carlos, for joining. Next is Mahmoud Farouk. He is the Associate Director of the Consortium for Science, Policy, and Outcomes, a clinical professor in the School for the Future of Innovation and Society, and a Senior Global Futures Scholar in the Julie Ann Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory at the Arizona State University. Mahmoud's work at the ASU Washington Center focuses on making science and technology more socially useful and democratic. Mahmoud is the principal coordinator of expert and citizen assessment of science and technology. That's at a distributed network of universities, science centers, and policy research organizations for engaging the public in science and technology policy and decision making. Welcome, Mahmoud. And last but certainly not least is Amy Sanders. She is an award-winning formal journalist, licensed attorney, and associate professor in the University of Texas at Austin School of Journalism and Media, and holds a courtesy appointment at UT Law School. Her research and practice focus on the intersection of law and emerging technology. She's an expert witness and consultant to Fortune 500 companies on media law and ethics issues. Professor Sanders has counseled international governments and law firms regarding regulatory proceedings, policy development, and pending litigation. She has published more than 24 scholarly articles, and her research has been funded by multiple grants, most recently from the National Science Foundation and New America. Welcome, Amy. Yeah, they're doing it. But before we jump into our Q&A and our robust conversation from our experts, I'd like to show a powerful video by Apple, which I believe does an excellent job of humanizing the way we think about technology's role and the impact in our lives and the lives of those around us. Technology is either embraced or abhorred, depending on who you talk to. But one thing about public public interest communications is we always put people at the center to create that humanized approach. We don't forget about our people. This ad is called The Greatest. It showcases disabled people in joyous and powerful ways and makes the brand's technology accessible and features seem like magic. You may recognize some of the lyrics in the song even if you've never heard it, because the lyrics are all quotes from the greatest himself, Muhammad Ali. The ad follows one of the public interest communications best practices of making people the hero. With that, show the ad.
Hey Siri, set my morning scene.
It's currently clear and 71 degrees. Today's high will be 80 degrees.
Open weather, swipe left.
I am the greatest. I said that even before I knew I was. I am the greatest. I said that even before I knew I was.
Describe images.
Flow like a butterfly, sing like a bee. His hands can't hit
A painting.
what his eyes can't see.
A red jacket.
Now you see me, now you don't. Sonny think he will, but I know he won't. Last week I murdered a rock into the stone. Hospitalized a brick. I'm so mean I make medicine sick.
I have wrestled with the alligator. Tussled with the whale.
Cut handcuffs like
Turn right.
those under in jail.
Tap, take picture. Tap, take picture.
Two doors detected. Text to stage. Door 4 feet away.
I'm young, I'm handsome, I'm fast, I'm pretty. The world judge me pretty like me. The world judge me pretty like me. What are we gonna do? We're gonna dance. What are we gonna do? We're gonna dance. I shook the world. I shook the world. I shook the world. Shook the world. I shook the world. I shook the world. I shook the world. Shook the world. I shook the world.
I shook the world.
Hey, wow, right? So that's just the tip of the iceberg into the technology and expertise needed to drive our work forward. Again, it puts people at the center and it really showcases why this work is so important. Today we want to uncover the intersection with PIC, the intersection with PIC and PIT, and how public interest technology influences activist movements. So with that, I want to jump into our first line of question. I want to start with Carlos, and I want to hear from each of you how your work defines public interest technology. Just talk to us a little bit how your work aligns with that definer.
Thank you, Nicole. And I want to thank you all, especially Angela, for the opportunity to be here. It's a very encouraging possibility for us to share our work, and especially to work on the intersection of the things we do to develop technology for the people and make it work. To make it work, we need your words, your message. And this is a great opportunity for us to we develop content that you can make it more available to people. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity. I have a little presentation with a few slides. I don't know if you can you please show the slides? I can see we have these wonderful lights in front of us, and they were directed to Alvaro because they were there to identify the spies. So Alvaro, you left us these slides. Well, listen, the first thing would be, what is public interest technology? When we talk about this, we like to keep the question open because we will not only have one answer for that, and we want the people to ask about it. So keeping the question open gives us a huge opportunity to think about this. So on this PTUN University network supported by the New American Foundation, in which we have been working together for years, we have been granted several grants. we always try to define this, and I'm the one who says, don't define it, keep it open. We cannot define it. We need people to ask us what it is. Well, but I'm going to be showing you some of the things I do in this area. When we have an earthquake, this is what happens. When we have a hurricane, this is what happens. When we have strong rainfalls, this is what happens. And who are the ones who suffer this? Everybody, but some suffer most. This is a Hurricane Mitch that took place in 1985, and he went around, it really moved crazily. And when I see this, I will share with you something that is something I have as a focus all the time when I work on these areas. This image. When I ask myself, what are we doing? I only have to remember this. And this gives us the focus. Why are we doing this? This is the reason. Then, whatever we do, we will think, this is the reason. This is why. And I have to be honest, I cannot say it without becoming very emotional. Then, poverty is already a disaster. When people live in poverty, they have to survive. And then when a disaster happens above that, they feel completely by themselves. They don't exist. So when the poverty is already a disaster, even before a hurricane hits and before the hurricane arrives. And that's what we work on. This is the number of disasters that is growing with time, especially due to meteorological and hydrological disasters. Here, earthquakes is up at the same number of disasters every year. And this is the number of victims, always too much, the fatalities. And this is something that we have to keep in mind. This shows the line above is the insured, the overall losses, and the one below is the insured losses. So the difference between those two lines are the uninsured. This is the people who will never recover, or will have more trouble recovering. And this gap grows every year. So this is what we do. We work improving data and models for reducing social natural risks. I have to make a little parenthesis here, because we usually say natural disasters. If a hurricane happens, or if an earthquake happens in the middle of the desert, nobody dies. So it's not a disaster. For us to have a disaster is because we have socially exposed a group of people. So that's why we have to put both things together, social natural risks. And we do it for social justice and public good. This is something related to the US. FEMA's, this was the flooding in New York in 2018, October 2018. And at that moment, people used to say that there was lots of reports saying that 58% of FEMA flood maps are inaccurate. So this means lots of people are not covered by the insurances, are not covered by the planning for that. Hopefully, this has really improved quite a lot. They are doing a great job, but that's not enough. It's far from enough. And the communities need to participate in the development of those risk maps. We need to help them have their own voice, because we cannot talk for them. We do something, but we cannot talk for them. And what we work in two areas. One of them is improving the data and the risk models for consulting and working with the communities. And this is something that I think, in the questions in the previous session, we need the universities to understand that people from the academic sector, they have to do consulting for the communities. And that is something that is not always recognized. I've been a professor in Venezuela for 35 years. I retired before I came here. I became emeritus. And to be honest, I did my academic career, and in a given moment I say, okay, enough. I've published a lot, I've given a lot of classes, but I want to be, what am I doing this for? So now I really don't care too much if I publish or not, even though I published 18 books. But at the same time I say, this is the reason why I want to do this. And I have to sacrifice a lot. My salary is pretty bad, and we always have trouble, but the universities, if they have some people who want to do it, should be encouraged to do that. So the first thing is improving the consulting and supporting capacities. And the second thing, we have created an academic program from high school all the way to graduate studies for students to learn this, how to deal with this. And why do we have to do it? Because in the models, those models don't work. They are very good to approach the problem, but most of the people the underrepresented people, the poorest people do not appear on those models. You don't see them. They vanish. Normally, most of those models, they work on the census tract level or the census block level. And when they do that, you have, let's say, a very wealthy family who lives in a great home here and a great building. And a couple of buildings, then you have a very poor people who live there. So they vanish.
Right.
They get in the average, and they disappear. You don't see them. They become invisible. And let me I'll show you just 2 examples. In this one, you will see the gray footprints are the footprints that come from the public data. Normally, the public data, even though some of the counties are very proud of them, is not good. So you can see the difference between the green, which is the public data that does not exist, and then the other one is the real footprints of the buildings. To get these real footprints, you really need to encourage local capacities. We do it with drones. We fly the drones, we fly with the people, and we will discuss this with the communities. You want me to unmute? I'm not unmute. What's going on? Okay. This is directed to Alvaro. And then it doesn't move to the next. You guys?
1 second, please.
Okay. Well, I'll keep on talking. The next one I'm going to show you is we have in Florida, I'm coming from Miami, and we have very important impacts from the sea level rise. But one of the worst moments during the year that we have this is when the king tide happens. In the king tides, the most vulnerable areas suffer. Hey, guys, help me. Okay, first, let me go to this one, yes. In this one, I can show you that those models lead to very bad results, not only because they make people, the weakest people disappear, but also because they assess very badly the results at the end. When we develop the specific models with the drones, we find differences. Here you can see some differences around 60% of the losses, the expected losses, but sometimes we get 200% difference. So we really need to have the people to be able to handle these things. And to be honest, I can tell you that FEMA and NOAA, they insist that we have to do this too. But then I'll talk about that in the next points. Now I want to show you about the king tide. I'm just finishing. Hey, next. Can you give me the next, please? Okay. Here you will see there's 4 pictures that they're taken with the drone flights that we do, with the videos that we produce. And we see areas in which people, they're ready to, this is let's say the limit before they really get flooded with the king tide. In the one to the upper, let's say lower left, you see a huge seawall that protects important properties. They're not having problem, and they can take it for years. Even if the sea level continues rising, they'll protect it. But most of the people do not have that. In the upper, the gray building, this is a very poor building. They don't have a seawall. And even the guys besides them, that is not a very wealthy building, they have to protect themselves. They put a wall because the water, when it floods that building, it goes for them on the side. So these kind of situations are very important, and people suffer quite a lot, lose a lot with this. Next one, we also developed some surveys for people to understand their risks themselves. An individual software that when you complete it, you will see what the risk you're exposed to, the hazard that you're exposed to, but then your vulnerability, the social vulnerability of the people. Not only the physical vulnerability, but the social, and the resilience capacity of the community in which they live, and the families. So we deliver this kind of results for people to understand. Because as I said, poverty is already a disaster, and we want people to be aware of that. And how do we engage the people with this? One of the things that we have done is to create a program on geographic information systems. And this program, we teach it from high school. I did it at Miami-Dade College, this program. And this program, the first level, this is a 21 credit program in GIS with which students can make their living. When they pass these things, they can go work in GIS with 21 credits, 1 year studies, unless they can make a reasonable living with that. And then we created a dual enrollment program for the high schoolers. So students from high school can take this credit and begin working on this. And I'm working in this high school, which is iTech High School. It's in the poorest areas of Miami, and it's very tough to work with them because these kids have to survive and they fight. So it's very hard to enroll them on this. But once they get into this, they can continue, and They can complete an associate degree in information technology, a BS in information technology, and all the pathway for the graduate courses at Florida International University. This thing, usually called them pathway, I call it a highway. And it is oriented to underrepresented minorities, mainly. And these are the conditions, because Miami-Dade College serves a minority-majority community with Hispanics 69%, blacks 18, and female 51. And the positions on GIS in the county are very different from that, did not reflect the reality of the county. Besides that, I have created a non-formal, non-credited program in which these are open courses, completely open and free for the people, for anyone who wants to join them. And they're financed by PITUN. PITUN gave us, with a grant, they gave me money to create these courses. So anyone can join these courses. And when they're open all year round, I always send the information to PITUN, but we have even people from outside the US. And this contributes to create a network with institutions even outside the US. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thanks so much,
Sorry,
Carlos.
maybe it took me so long.
That was great. Thank you. Thank you. Mahmoud, let's hear from you.
Thank you. And I'm also thankful for this opportunity to be here. I did my undergrad in U of H, and this was my peer pressure room because one time I was invited here for a banquet, and I was late. And I'm a Muslim, so I was fasting. And so the waiter came and said, soup or salad. And I didn't want to explain why I said neither, so I said salad. So this was the only time I actually broke a fast, so this is kind of a peer pressure room for me. So I hope I do better. As far as, I really like that Carlos gave us that open definition. And in my line of work, and it's also like piggybacking what he just said, is how do you make the invisible visible? And it is, so my work involves the public in public interest technology.
Okay.
And how do we define the public?
Right.
So there are actually, we're academics, so we have to give definitions so we can organize our work. So we think of publics in three groups in terms of public interest technology. The first is the communities who are directly impacted whatever the science and technology we're doing, the first line. Around the communities are groups of experts and stakeholders who have a stake in the technology or the solution or the science or what is being done. And then outside of it, you have the publics who may not be directly involved or impacted by the technology, but they are related to it because we live in a democratic society and everybody should have a say.
Right.
And so now what my work involves is how do we can engage all of those three in science and technology issues. Now, Carlos gave the example of the hurricane and natural disasters. So if you think back, in my bio, one of the questions was, how do we make science more useful for society?
Yeah.
Why does that question even come up? Science should be useful for society, right? But it comes up because in science and technology, we start with what's the most interesting question, or what is the next technological breakthrough? And then once we do that, then we go say, hey, society, what will it take you to accept this? So we're always talking about social acceptability of a technologically derived choice as opposed to deliberating on technological alternatives of socially desired choice.
Right.
So it's basically the idea is flipping the model. So instead of starting with the most interesting research question, you start with what's the most pressing public problem. And then you engage the communities, the stakeholders, and the publics, and you come up with very interesting answers that you wouldn't get to if you started with technology.
That's right.
So if you take, for instance, driverless cars. 2017, Elon Musk was predicting that by 2020, they'll be everywhere. They were, it's the next transportation revolution. It was going to be $1 trillion industry, right? what we did was we said, okay, that's fine. Let's go have some conversations. So we went in a community in Cumberland, Maryland, which is a poor rural community, and then we went to Baltimore, Maryland. And we said, okay, driverless cars, what's your hopes? What's your concerns? And what we found, their hopes and concerns were in 3 buckets. First was about freedom and autonomy. How much control I'm going to give up, how much control I'm going to retain. But if you look at what the industry was, there were there are different levels of automation. So, depending on how much. So level 5 is completely, there's no steering wheel in the car. So level 3 is the most dangerous because that requires human and machine negotiation. So there are companies that said that's the most risky scientifically. We're not even going to bother with that. So they went to 4 and 5, right? Guess which one people actually preferred? In some people's mind, the complete, driverless option is not an acceptable option, right? They want the freedom.
They want some,
so again, if we ask, well, what will it take you to accept this versus what do you actually need, you come with freedom and autonomy. You come up with concerns about jobs. But it's not just, a loss of jobs, but it's also about training. So we had a volunteer firefighter, and he was saying, how am I going to rescue somebody from one of these things that doesn't have a steering wheel? Where do I cut in? I need retraining. So you can understand there's a whole layer of supporting professions that need retraining.
Right.
And then finally, the last thing was security. It wasn't just, whether it's going to be safe to get me from point A to B. Will I trust to my daughter in this to go to the soccer practice, or my parents to the doctor's appointment, and what will happen with their data? So that is the kind of area of public interest where my work focuses on, is engaging communities, stakeholders, and public on mostly emerging technology issues so that we can involve them from the very beginning. And because one of the first problem I think we were talked about framing. What is that? Is this a mobility challenge, or is it, getting some, driverless cars on the road?
Right.
So that's kind of thing I think is very important. That's kind of where my work focuses on.
That's amazing. That's awesome. And I like the thought of, but it's putting people again at the center and making sure you don't focus too much on technology. You miss the human piece of it that still needs to be involved and embedded in this process. Amy, let's hear from you.
I'm actually going to pick up right there. So the project that I'm a part of is an effort to help both public interest attorneys and journalists and citizen advocates understand access to justice issues. And what we learned when we went to these folks is that although court records are open to the public, they're not easy to access. And so we talked with these groups about what they needed the information for, right? What is it that you are looking for when you go to court records? And some of our advocates were saying courts are starting to demand empirical evidence from us to show, for example, that we're detaining Black and brown people and treating them differently than white people. Well, I think all of us in this room have a hunch that's true, but do we have the numbers? Do we have the empirical evidence to prove to courts what's happening? And so we met with the groups of people first who were interested in using our technology. And I think going off of what you said, Mahmoud, about making the invisible visible, our technology, and I'm going to show a video a little bit later, is designed to uncover trends in access to justice that you wouldn't see otherwise. Our first case study that we did in the Northern District of Illinois, which is the Chicagoland area, discovered that federal judges are granting fee waiver petitions, the petitions that allow poor, indigent litigants to get into federal court, say to sue their landlord for discriminating. Judges are granting those at dramatically different rates, even within one jurisdiction. And what that means to poor litigants is that whether or not you can get into court, depends on the luck of the draw. That's not how a democracy is supposed to operate. That's not how we would imagine an equitable society to function. And the chief judge in this particular court had no idea that her judges were engaging in this disparate treatment of indigent litigants. That's huge.
Yeah.
That's giving a voice to people who are voiceless.
That's right.
And that's what public interest technology is about, right? Working from the start to make sure that the technologies that we create are serving everyone and helping everyone.
Can you talk a little bit about how your work uncovers those biases that are happening at the legal level and specifically with those court cases? It's very interesting.
Absolutely. So I work with a great group of scientists and other folks from about 5 different universities. Thanks to the National Science Foundation, we were able to create a machine learning tool that pulls in all of the federal court records, the docket sheets and other records, and then can systematically do large-scale content analysis of those records to determine things like, are litigants who ask for interpreters being given those interpreters? We know that they have a right under the law to have that assistance. We also know if you've been in a courtroom for even a day or two in the Houston area, that doesn't always happen. What often happens is a judge says, is there anybody in the room who can speak Vietnamese? And then we think it's okay, it's good enough.
That's right.
To provide that person with someone who can presumably speak Vietnamese, right? And so what we're able to find when we do these large-scale content analyses is where are these gaps in access to justice, right? We can start to look at what does it mean when we have litigants who are given public defenders versus access to paid counsel.
Financing, right.
What do the disparate outcomes look like?
They're vast.
They're vast.
They're vast.
And what this is going to allow us to do, and others that we're serving to do, is to tell these stories, for journalists to tell these stories, for citizen advocates and pro bono attorneys to be able to argue for more resources and to shine a spotlight onto these inequities.
I mean, you have public defenders who are literally juggling 20 to 40 cases a day. And how much time do they have to really invest in getting to know the person, getting to know the cause? Not every case is just cookie cutter. You know what, you did something wrong, go straight, to jail.
And the idea that we think that is equitable justice,
correct,
to having paid counsel is sad.
And that's across, I mean, that's, dealing with housing and eviction, but that's
100%.
across the criminal legal system, which is quite traumatizing, particularly in communities of color. Thank you. Did you have a video? I know you had a video you wanted to show for this. Yeah. Can we cue the next video?
We have sound.
Equivalent of 500 books being produced every single day for every man, woman, and child on the face of the earth. But the data is hard to understand. The only people who really have a mechanism for understanding the data are data scientists or analysts. And even for them, it's hard work. And so what we're trying to do is free up the knowledge in the data to empower more and more and more people. What my team has built is a system called Saturn. And what Saturn does is it allows you to ask questions in English of the data. The system figures out all the calculations it has to do and then provides you the answer back with either a graph or a number or a sentence, depending upon how to best communicate it to you.
Our target users are legal scholars, journalists. We've learned that they're very comfortable doing searches. They're comfortable reading graphs and charts, but they can't code.
Saturn as a platform is designed to automate, in some sense, aspects of data science. Because the way those users were going after work with data now is through sort of the human interface. They go find someone who has the technical skills that can help them make sense of the data and answer the questions they're looking to get answered. What that looks like in our interface is there's a data context up top that a user can use simple keyword searches against, and then from that context they can ask a series of questions and get answers back.
Is to create a technology that gives everyone access through natural language query, just like you might use Google, for example, to ask questions about this massive amount of records. To put it in perspective, we have 2 full years of federal court docket sheets from 2016 and 2017. And we have more than 850,000 dockets. That's 2 years in the federal courts. And you might say, why don't we have them all? The reason we don't have them all is because the federal government is charging us 10 cents a page to access public records. And that's the 10 cents a page that an indigent litigant would have to pay, that an undocumented person who has been unlawfully detained would have to pay, that someone who has been jailed pre-trial would have to pay. These are public records, they're not free, and they're not accessible. And our mission is to solve that.
So impossible barriers. Absolutely impossible, and very designed in that way, right, to make it impossible. Wow. It's the access, I think, that technology gives us to uncover these things today has made a difference in how we collaborate around this work and how we move our social justice causes forward. I think it's amazing. And that really is what kind of brings me, and I think you guys have unpacked this a little bit in the first question, but like really honing into how public interest technology intersects with public interest communications in your work and just some of the findings. And Mahmoud, I wanted to hear a little bit from you about that.
Sure. So just again, starting with definitions, so we understand what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. So, communication, when I'm doing communication with the public, there's 3 types. So one is communication from the sponsor, so it's the government, to the public. Mm-hmm. Then there's the public consultation when it's coming from the communities back to the sponsor. But the one that we are really interested in is the bidirectional one, okay, where you have two-way communication. So the reason we are doing that is because we feel that just like we value expert knowledge that universities are good at, right? We also have lived evidence, lived knowledge, mm-hmm, that only exists with people, right? And then there's also something called living evidence, living knowledge, which hasn't made it yet to the published record. We understood this during COVID response, mm-hmm, because we had to make real-time decisions about how to get people vaccinated. And then we saw, mm-hmm, there were all these big spots where we were not able to penetrate, right, no matter how much vaccine we made available. Right. But then what works in those communities? Who is the trusted, right, deliverer?
Because a lot of it was just sort of connecting with the people, right?
Yes.
You have a community of people, and I'll say there are many people in the Black community that do sometimes have a distrust of the medical profession in the medical field, and rightfully so. There are a lot of health inequities. There are a lot of disparate outcomes where Black and white medical, techniques and procedures are concerned. And so it's getting to those folks and convincing and making them understand the importance and the health factors involved, right, with this pandemic and why it's important for vaccines to exist and to be vaccinated. And so if you're coming from a place where you're not connecting with the community or they don't connect with you, you're not that trusted advisor. How do you make some leeway into those communities?
Exactly, and some of those knowledge actually exists with the frontline workers or the community organizers. So who would know that barbershops will be more effective than giving CVS a bunch of vaccines to give out free? So these are kind of things you only know if you have a relationship with the community. But what in academia, it's hard for us because we're still, NIH is looking for a peer review publication before they can mandate. So how do we kind of incorporate the living knowledge of this, what works, what doesn't?
Yeah.
So the way we actually organize our things is that we have a network that brings in universities and science centers and policy think tanks. So science centers brings in the communication piece because they're trained public communicator of complex science and technology issues. They can take something, and they're also somewhat trusted institutions. They're not like, a government entity and so forth. So they can create the spaces where people can come and have dialogues. And then from the university side, we are giving the social science of science, the evidence for what are the societal implications.
That's right.
But then we just don't want to engage and educate. We want to also inform policy and decision making, and that's where the think tank piece comes in. So communication for us, in my line, is to connecting these three entities, and that's where I think the public interest communication and public interest technology, at least my work-wise, there's a overlap.
That's awesome. Thank you, Memo. Carlos, can we hear a little bit from you? You spoke a lot of really interesting information about how some communities are seen and some are unseen. The term that I immediately think about is redline communities. We know that communities of color tend to be under-resourced, disinvested, both in this country and beyond, right? So can you talk a little bit about how technology is really sort of getting into those communities and moving the public good forward?
I want to go maybe a little deeper into communication itself first.
Yeah.
Communication, as we deliver this kind of projects and this kind of contents and this kind of data, we deliver content that could be communicated through your work that most of you do here. But communication has, let's say, when we talk about media, well, why is media called media? It's because media is not the content itself. You have to differentiate between media, the content, and the most important part, the subject, the people. So when you talk about communication, we have to put all these things together. And communicating, we bring content, we try to develop people, but it's got to be the people's voice, the ones that we allow and help develop. There was maybe some of you know this, the psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan, he invented a word. He used to invent a lot of words for the psychoanalysis process, and he invented a word that's called par l'être. Par l'être means talking, being. Put both things together. So the par l'être that we all are is the condition of the human being. The language is our condition. The language is the capacity that we have to fight for liberty, for freedom. That's at the end what it is. That's the goal of life, as I understand it, as most of philosophers understand it. So when we do this, we try to give the people the possibility to find their way to liberty, to freedom. And so that's the main part of this thing. And when you work with this kind of contents, like the one we develop, you are giving the people the possibility to get rid of a condition in which they will never be free if they don't live free of disasters, or at least reduce the risks as much as you can. But you all know that taking that position of delivering your message, of being a real subject, looking for liberty, for freedom, I don't really understand the difference too much in English from liberty to freedom, but maybe it's freedom, the real word that I should be talking about. It's risky, pretty risky. I can tell you on my own career, as I told you, I've been a professor, and so, but on my way, I was Minister of Science and Technology and Minister of Urban Development in my country. And after I left the government, I became somebody who used to write a lot of articles against the government. development, against the policies, not the people, but the policy that were badly done. Until a moment, I was menaced and I had to flee. I fled my country 10 years ago. I'm very thankful for being American for the last 3 years, but that was a very tough situation. So this becomes risky, really, but that's a risk we have to take. That's a risk we have to say what we have to say, and we have to help people develop themselves. At the end, we're just creating conditions for the people to develop themselves. And the way we do it, in a way, we create these college course certificates because we need those students to learn about this, and that's the way for us to deliver the message to their parents. Because their parents live in a condition in which they just survive. They have to work the day to day. Sometimes they have 2 jobs, 3 jobs. They don't have time to be with their kids. That's why we try to go to the high schoolers and to the people in college for them to understand what's going on, what the risks in which they live, how to try to empower them to be able to say, well, listen, I live in a risk area. What's the problem with the insurances? What's going on in this municipality that we're not doing what we have to do? So at the end, it comes to develop some contents and try to give them to the people, and then comes the other situation. You develop the content, you give it to the people. So there is a dual way of modifying each other. The message modifies the people, and the people modify the message. So that's where the area in which we have to deal with. But at the end, again, in the work that I do, I need you. I need what you do. I need you to help me get to the people. And because it's never enough. I don't know if I answered you.
And technology really is that tool, right? Technology has been the thing that's bridged the gap for all of us across, the country, across globally. It's, awakened us to all of the current, situations and issues that are plaguing our country, that it's been behind technology, which kind of brings me to my last question, which is around public interest technology and activism. Just as I think about the differences between where we are today and where we were in the past, right? Before technology, for example, during the civil rights movements in the 1960s, if you were a civil rights activist, there was no real technology. You had something that happened, say, in the Deep South that, a civil rights activist, organization wanted to galvanize the community around. They had to pick up the telephone to spread the word and to get, movement around people, protesting and speaking up and speaking out. You're at the mercy of whether a telephone operator will patch you through to, your civil rights organization or your community. Today, we have social media, we have IG, we have Twitter, we have YouTube, and et cetera, that we are seeing things in real time. We're seeing, unfortunately, horrific tragedies happening and unfolding before our very eyes at the hands of the people who are supposed to protect and serve. We're seeing health, mortality issues rise in communities of color. And so, these are things that we're seeing in real time, and we're able to immediately start creating action and building our voice and building our protest around. And so I think without technology today, it's one of those things where people sometimes say, we lose a lot of human interaction with technology. We're missing that piece. Mahmoud, to your point, do we need cars that are just void of human intervention, human prevention, human sort of protocol? What is the real need? And how do we balance sort of that human, hands-on effort along with some technology that will help create accessibility and help us, collaborate together. And so I'd like to show this one video, it's the last video. It really shows how technology helped us galvanize around the Black Lives Matter movement. And this is the greatest example for me that I think that serves our purpose in this work.
What started as a hashtag in 2013 went from trending on social media to becoming one of the largest movements in American history. Black Lives Matter started with a Facebook post by one of its founders, Alicia Garza. Her post, entitled "A Love Letter to Black People," was a dedication to the Black community after the acquittal of George Zimmerman in the killing of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. She ended with the words, "Black people, I love you, I love us, our lives matter." Garza and her friends Patrice Cullors and Opal Tometi coined the hashtag Black Lives Matter later that year. As the hashtag's popularity grew, so did backlash with the rise of White Lives and All Lives Matter groups. The number of black victims of police brutality also grew, making the slogan increasingly important. In 2014, the deaths of Tamir Rice, Eric Garner, and Michael Brown ignited the movement and protests nationwide. But it was the death of Michelle Clouseau that same year that began Say Her Name, a subsection of the Black Lives Matter movement that focuses on black women who have lost their lives to police violence. It quickly rose in popularity and was used in protests for the deaths of Sandra Bland and then Breonna Taylor. In 2019, places where BLM protests occurred had a 20% decrease in killings by police. Local protests also increased the amount of police body cams and community policing initiatives. In 2020, as many as 26 million people participated in demonstrations protesting the killing of George Floyd. By the end of the year, Black Lives Matter raised $90 million, which went to expenses like crisis intervention, civic engagement, and grassroots funding. The killing of George Floyd also changed the demographics of support towards Black Lives Matter. Nearly 95% of the protests happened in majority white counties. Today, there are 3 entities of Black Lives Matter, including the nonprofit BLM Global Network Foundation, which committed $21.7 million in grant funding to official and unofficial BLM chapters, as well as 30 Black-led local organizations. But despite the organization's success, family members of Tamir Rice and Michael Brown have spoken out against Black Lives Matter for profiting off the police killings of their relatives. And some have questioned where financial contributions go. Still, the mission of Black Lives Matter remains straightforward, and as it's grown, so has its impact. Black Lives Matter members in Los Angeles successfully fought for the firing of ex-LAPD police chief Charlie Beck after they saw a rise in police shootings of black suspects in the area. In 2020, Black Lives Matter received more media coverage than any protest in 50 years, and the hashtag was shared more than 100 million times in the month after George Floyd was killed. Within weeks of the 2020 protests, Louisville, Kentucky banned no-knock warrants, Minneapolis banned chokeholds, and major cities made budget cuts to their police departments, including Los Angeles and New York City.
So this is just a prime example without technology, like the widespread support that that movement was able to receive would have never happened, right? Pre-technology. And this kind of brings me back, Amy, to you and your work from a legal perspective, like just kind of hearing a little bit more around the activism piece. If you can expound on that, that'd be great.
Absolutely. As you said, Nicole, there have always been activists, right? Abolitionists were activists.
Exactly.
And when we think about the fields of public interest communication and public interest technology, they trace their roots into public interest law, which really rose out of the civil rights movement. And we can actually sort of trace this idea of public interest law to Justice Louis Brandeis, who happened to be the first Jewish Supreme Court justice and was, in his practice before being a justice, sort of an ardent advocate for laborers and the American worker and sort of underrepresented and underprivileged groups. And he had a really interesting quote that I wanted to share with you that I think sort of frames a little differently where we are in this moment. He says, "Able lawyers have, to a large extent, allowed themselves to become adjuncts of great corporations and have neglected their obligation to use their power for the protection of the people." And to me, that's what public interest work is about. Whether we're talking about public interest law, we're talking about public interest technology, or we're talking about public interest communication, we're talking about using the power and the privilege that we may have at any given time to protect people who don't have that same power and privilege. And the interesting thing about public interest law that really harkens to the moment we're in right now is that the public interest law isn't a body of law. It's not a subject area of law, right? It's about whose interests are being represented. And in order to protect underrepresented and marginalized people, law schools realized that big law firms weren't going to do this work. And they realized they had to get students interested in a professional path that, one, was harder, and two, paid less.
And paid less, right?
But three,
they cared about.
They care about and yielded big results.
That's right.
And so what did law schools do? They created clinical legal education. And so law schools around the country have clinics that give students experience in their second and third years of law school representing people who need legal support. And so my thought is, what does that look like for us as folks who are involved in public interest technology? What does that look like for those of us who are interested in public interest communication? What are we going to make as our clinical legal education? What is that going to be? And in challenging you to think about that, for those of us who are scholars in the room and administrators in the room, I want to point out one really important thing, because I want us to do it better than the law folks did. When law schools created clinical legal education, they marginalized those faculty members. They marginalized those faculty members by paying them less and by not putting them on the tenure track. And so I want to challenge us as we think about how we teach our students to engage in these critically important fields. How do we make sure it comes with the respect that it deserves, right? We cannot marginalize the people who are helping the marginalized people.
Exactly. Yeah. And the growth and upward trajectory.
Absolutely.
And the income. That's right. Thank you. That was amazing. I want to open it up. I know we've spent a lot of time talking to you guys. I want to open the floor for any questions, if there's questions online or in the room. Oh, right over here.
Thank you so much. In listening to the conversation and thinking about the previous panel, which was focused on community engaged scholarship, and hearing you talk a little bit about community engaged technology development, when we were hearing, one of the mandates to do community engaged scholarship has to do with slowing down. How does that get negotiated in the field of technology development, where we hear terms like arms races and things like that?
Because when I talk to funders, whether it's the National Federal Funding Agency or private philanthropies, because they said that we have climate change, we have this huge crisis, we need to accelerate the technology development for climate solution. But a lot of the solution being thought of, whether you're talking about hydrogen hubs or carbon dioxide removal or solar geoengineering, or all this energy transition are going to have a big impact on communities. And so the way I answer that question is that actually it is in the interest of the government, the technology developers, to actually do the community engagement at the same time we're doing the research and development work, because, just like I said about the driverless car example, right? There are, blind spots. There's a lot of things that, you have choices, different pathways of developing something that knowing that early rather than after the fact is much costly and more expensive. So the idea is to create parallel process to accelerate the social science. Imagine, just COVID example again. December 2020, we just learned about the pandemic. What does government do? We have patient number one. They signed a contract with Moderna guaranteeing them that whatever vaccine you develop, we're going to buy it. And December, you have the vaccine. In 2021, more people died when we had the vaccine versus 2020 when we didn't have the vaccine. Mm-hmm. If we had taken that time to do the engaged scholarship, we would have figured it out much sooner than after the vaccine. Now let's figure out how to get people vaccinated. Mm-hmm. So this is the message. And I want to also just double up on Amy's point about the disincentives universities give for people trying to do this work. If you're a scientist or an engineer, you have some innovation. the university will throw their whole patent office, tech transfer office at your disposal to get this to the market. There's no conflict of interest. But if you're a social scientist doing engaged scholarship,
All sorts of barriers.
there's all these, the moment you cross the line to advocacy, you get
Pushback.
yeah, pushback. And
Barriers.
you're supposed to make these disinterested scholars, right, who are objective about facts. They cannot really get too close to the subject, right? So there's a flaw in the system that I want to also flag, I think, that gives disincentive to do this kind of work. So did I answer your question?
It's an imbalance, in my opinion, towards profit, right? And things that may not produce that money dollar sign up front, but is the good of the people.
I think one of the other things to address your question, we talked all day about the importance of the relationship of everyone who's working together. And I love my team. I've said this a million times. My team is attorneys. My team is data scientists. My team is computer engineers. My team is librarians. There's a reason that I'm up here in front of you and that my engineering team is not up here in front of you. And I think when we're engaging in these really, really important projects, we have to be able to tell the story that Carlos told, and the story that Mahmoud told, and the story that I told to funders. We have to be able to tell that story. We tell this story back to the NSF constantly because we've been funded for 5 years, thank you, for $5 million. And we have a beta version. And when people ask us, well, why don't you have more? Why isn't it Google? We have to tell them things like, well, you know what? There are 94 federal trial courts in this country, and they don't all use the same documents. That's what, 94 federal trial courts in this country, they don't all use the same documents. What does that mean? That means my engineers had to take into account the differences in 94 federal courts documents to be able to get our tool to produce consistent and accurate results. And so part of what's so integral is understanding. We knew going in there were 94 different types of the same document, and we told that to the funder, and we've told that to our community that we're working with, and we did that because we were doing the R&D at the same time. We had folks on the team who knew how to communicate that message, and we had the subject matter expertise who said, whoa, it's going to take us a while to code for this. And so when you're working in these kinds of projects, you have to have that kind of team. You have to go across your organization or your university to find these folks who can work together, because I can't do what my engineers can do, and my engineers wouldn't be telling you the same story in the way that I'm telling it.
I would like to make a little comment from the engineering side.
Carlos is an exceptional storyteller.
Well, listen, at the Miami-Dade College, which is a very large college with more than 100,000 students and very well engaged with the poorest areas in Miami, I have developed these programs. And so we have the contents, the capacities, and a group of consultants from outside the college that are supported especially by PITUN, Public University Network. And we are ready. We have done a lot of study cases around in Miami-Dade, and we knock at the door of the communities and the municipalities, and we're ready to work with you. And they say, hey, but we don't have the knowledge, and we don't have the money. I say, well, let's get some grants together. And that's what I tell them. I say, okay, now we're talking about, and when I call them, okay, I'm ready, let's sit down, let's ask for the grants. They don't show up. They don't have time. They don't have money. They don't have resources. And they have to survive. So they don't think, well, the hurricane is coming, but, well, sometime. Maybe you all remember there was a song, they used to, when the COVID came, what was the song? Oh, I forgot. I forgot it. I'm getting old. Okay. But anyway,
My
So
legal aid attorneys are the exact same way, Carlos.
Yes.
Right? Like, if we get 30 minutes with these folks, that is the most valuable 30 minutes we could get, but that's all we're going to get.
Yeah, but,
Their time
and it's
is
not enough.
dedicated
It's
to
just-
survival.
yeah.
but let me complete this thing, because sometimes there's large and huge contracts for the consulting in some areas, but these are big companies that take them, so we cannot compete with them. So even if we focus on certain communities, and then the thing happens again, because those large companies, they take care of the whole the whole county or the whole 100 census tracts, and then people disappear. They disappear. They're invisible. This makes me remember once I created a program for blind poor university students in Venezuela some time ago. And I got some money for them, and I had 20 students that we created this scholarship for them. And the day they came to my office and they signed the contract for the scholarship, one of them said, "Hey guys, you see, we're not invisible." So the blind people, they feel invisible. And that's the way, when we talk about the things, the poor people, they feel they're invisible. I'm not there, I don't belong to this. I don't have the right, I don't even have the time. So this is the kind of things we have really to fight with. And universities really have a huge role on this. We really have to get in contact with the people so we can do these kind of things. If we don't, they will keep on disappearing.
Yeah.
And we have to teach them how to fly
you.
little drones. You can get a drone for $1,000, and they can fly this thing, and they learn GIS, and FEMA delivers the software. Just to finish with, this program that I have created at Miami-Dade College, I think all colleges in the US should have it, because it's a simple thing to do. You teach GIS, even the proprietary institutions who own these things, they give them to you for free. Would you just pay $500 to have the license for a year? You can have 100 students on this, and you can develop these kind of things. It's not expensive, but then it doesn't happen. So,
Any more thoughts in the room? Any more questions before we close out? No. We have time for maybe one more question. Sure. Great.
we have 15 minutes, it says.
Oh, sorry.
There's
We have
two
time for a couple more questions. Sorry. We started a little late. My bad.
Okay, thank you. This is a really great panel, and I actually have two questions, but I'll limit it to one. And it's kind of specific, and this is the reason I was kind of waffling. So my project is bringing public interest communications as a field into a program where it does not exist currently. So we've got these different handles, and I'm trying to open windows along the way. And public interest technology is very interesting to me because we have a really strong tech and society at the University of Washington, really great people. So I'm thinking about a law class that all communications students have to take, and case studies, right? So what I would love to hear about, and if it's too big for this discussion now, that's great, but I would love to know some case studies or some ideas. The story around clinical law, I think, would be something that students could really hang on to think about public interest communication, but some case studies or some resources where I can go to think about how to frame this for undergraduates in particular is what I'm talking about, would be really helpful.
So Carlos has talked about PICU and the Public Interest Technology University Network, who has also helped fund some of the work that I'm doing. And they have a number, I think, of really interesting studies and case studies and examples of grantees and stuff that's going on. And I have used some of those with my classes because I think college students are inspired by seeing what's going on in colleges and with college students, right? And seeing like, wow, look at what these folks can do. I think your idea is phenomenal. And you have a great group of folks at UW who I think would embrace this. And the one little, kernel of wisdom, if I have any, is I don't think PIT or PIC needs to be housed anywhere in particular. I applaud universities like Florida that say, I want to own this. We're gonna own this. I think that's really freaking smart. Because when I talk to folks about technology and the regulation of technology and the ethics of technology, one of the things that they're saying to me is, we have a gaping need for what you might think of as privacy professionals. And these are people who are thinking about the issues that E mentioned this morning, who are thinking about the issues that we're talking about. Like, how do we protect these people? How do we protect their data? How do we communicate with these people? All of these kinds of things. And so I think thinking about this the way you're thinking about it, there are jobs there. But I don't think any one university department has to own it. I think this is where you go to your university and you say, as we've discovered at UT Austin, there are people all across our university working in these spaces. There are people who are working in these spaces who don't identify as public interest technologists or public interest communicators.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I would say really do a deep dive in your university, because knowing Washington and what y'all are known for, the folks are there, and the case studies might even be there as well.
I see a hand in the back.
So first to comment, I think that this information or this burgeoning interest of technology for public interest communications is really important. Carlos, to your point, I started off my career as a city planner, and the GIS system helps, at least in my advocacy for Latino communities, understand the infrastructure changes. Here in Houston, as an example, when you talk about the Army Corps of Engineers and what's going to happen here, or a new development is going to change the floodplain, who's going to be impacted? The communities that are poor, that have less access, or don't even understand that there is a system and how they can challenge it. So it's definitely empowering. And Amy, I think in parallel, and I'm in Houston, you know, there's a lot of barriers to the technology that talks about climate change or environmental justice issues, because I work on the corporate side, so I know where you can find all the reporting, the public information, and it's not easy if you're not in the industry to know where to go and hold companies accountable and take that information, a lot of like printing and access to documents, et cetera, so that you can go from a community perspective and say, hey, this is the damage, this is what's happening. So I think it's very relevant now, especially given that the fact that the internet and access is so equalizing, though you still get the barriers that not everybody speaks the same language. So I think it's great that this is emerging, and I feel that I'm based in Houston. Houston could definitely do something specific on the environmental justice side, especially.
You hit on something really important that I also want to talk about, and that is, for those of us who are training students, I think every project needs a public interest communicator, in the sense that, you know, E mentioned translational research, and I included in the materials for today, you know, we talked about journal articles and the fact that journal articles are required for tenure, but they're not exactly the best way to actually reach the public. I included two examples of what we've tried to do with our project. One is we published a piece in Science, which is unfortunately paywalled, but I got it to y'all, talking about the importance of our project and trying to find those audiences of people who are doing the kind of work that we're doing. And we're also publishing op-eds about the issues of, for example, the one I included was about, you know, why are we paying for court records when these are public documents? And we're in a really unique position to be able to do that because we have journalism folks, we have communication folks on our team. And I think oftentimes scientists and engineers are so pressured to do the science and to do the engineering and to rush, right, and to get through the technology, that they don't have time to focus on that kind of stuff. And so there's a huge opportunity, I think, there for getting the message of this really important work out that we should be baking into our grant projects, right? That we're gonna have a communications person who is going to share these deliverables, not in a journal article, right?
But in a way that's
not
digestible.
Not in some wonky academic
Exactly.
symposium where it's just professors talking to professors, but on NPR, on, podcasts that people listen to, through web novellas and other kinds of ways that actually reach the public and the communities that we're trying to help.
But also reach them in a way where they understand, to your point, right? Because journals, we understand what the meaning, but when you're putting that on social media or you're putting it in an op-ed, people have very little time. We know as communicators, people will spend at tops maybe 2 to 3 minutes reading through something that they find beneficial to them. So it's figuring out who is your audience, what do they need to hear, and when do they need to hear it? And then also, where are they at? How do we find them? Are they on LinkedIn? Are they on Twitter? Are they listening to podcasts? Are they, driving in? Are they commuters?
Or are they at the barber
to
shop?
NPR? Right. Are they at the hair salon? And so, again, I think it goes back to the seen and unseen, which is, Carlos, you've spoken a lot about Mahmoud, you've spoken a lot about just bringing that community first, like understanding the technology we're developing, but who are we developing it for and how are they going to use it? And are we going at this the wrong way? Are we putting the technology, are we putting the horse before the cart, or you know what I mean? And so, yeah, I mean, this is a really powerful conversation because I think a lot of times I go back to how people think about technology, and I just think about my dad, who has pushed back on all things technology because he's in a time where you talk to people, you pick up the phone, he doesn't even have an ATM card. He likes to go into his local credit union and talk to the tellers. And so his concept of technology is that removal of humanness. And I think that's where, as communicators, we also try to sort of reinvest in the human angle. And a lot of times that is an investment dollar sign, right? Because these are communities that have been disinvested. These are communities that have been left behind. They've been redlined. They've been, made to pay for court records, which should be public on purpose, right? And so it requires us to take a step back and say, how do we undo these wrongs? And it requires a lot of investment on the upfront. So, any questions online or any more? I don't want to miss. Oh, sorry. There you go.
So, great panel. But I just wanted to bring up the point that everybody, or almost everybody in this room, just got an Amber Alert. And that was kind of my idea of, technology that exists that we can actually use, rather than having to actually develop the technology, cold. So I think we need to think in terms of what technology is there and how can we use it to better communicate.
Absolutely.
And here's a question for you. Yes. Are those Amber Alerts available in Spanish in Texas? Are those Amber Alerts available in Vietnamese in Houston? Right? This is a great technology, but it's not a technology that serves everybody yet.
It's a bias.
But it could be.
Yeah.
So can we then go to Apple and say, hey, offer up an
Right.
alternative to be
That's right.
instant translation?
Yeah. And who are the Amber Alerts covering? Are they covering all missing and lost, individuals, or just a larger group? So technology works when it works, but we also have to think about the bias that's embedded in it, right? And the inequalities and the unfairness, right? And make sure that it is equal across the board. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, there's a hand over there.
I'm kind of curious about the clinical legal education model that you mentioned. And I'm coming from social work, where I had to do a practicum with a person who was working in the field who already had 2 years experience and had a master's level. But my understanding is maybe clinical legal folks aren't practitioners in the field who are adjunct faculty. They are real faculty, but maybe there's something in either of those models that this group could look at and consider.
Absolutely. So traditionally, the way clinical legal education has worked is law schools have brought in longtime practitioners who are then full faculty. In a perfect world, they are tenured faculty. That's not often the case. But who supervise the students in their clinic. So a typical legal clinic has maybe 12 to 15 students per attorney, and the students work together in groups on various cases. But it gets them into the courtroom. It gets them filing motions. It gets them working with clients and engaging with clients and learning how to speak to clients. And I think the real beauty of this work from the legal perspective is the last statistics I saw when clinical legal education, before clinical legal education, we were talking about 2% of attorneys going into public interest law. And now we're up to almost 20% expressing an interest in public interest law. To put this in perspective, I'm not a dinosaur, but I'm old. I started law school in 2001, and I left law school having no idea what public interest law was.
Right.
And you know, it's really unfortunate because I knew one thing when I started law school. I didn't want to go work for the man. I was the target for public interest law, but nobody ever came to me and said, hey, you would be great for public interest law. And so part of what we need to think about is how do we identify these students who want to do these things?
It's the same with public interest communications. It just didn't exist. I happened into this work through other things and other sort of ventures that was purposeful to me, right? I wanted to make an impact. And to your point, you wanted to make an impact. But we are looking at a generation of social activists. Yes. I mean, that are, you know, they're out there and they're loud and they're proud and we hear their voices and they're young and bold and brave. And I think those are our people, you know. And that's why having this field, having these conversations, connecting these dots is so important, because otherwise it happens in a silo and we miss those opportunities organically to come together and say, you're working in this area, here's how I can contribute, here's how I can elevate this work, so that like all of your smart thinking is brought down to our audiences in a way that they get it, they know what to do, they know how to act, and they know where to be. Same with you, Mahmoud. You know, it's like, again, engaging the community, bringing that lived experience and that humanized angle, and making sure we're not operating up here, instead of, you know, at the community level. And legally, I mean, we just know that the legal system, I mean, it's intentional, it's purposeful, right? And so there's just so much undoing that needs to happen across criminal legal reform, across, you know, voting rights, you know, and it just rights restoration, and just every facet of the criminal legal system has been, you know, has built a wall around people to, you know, you do a crime, you're going to pay for it for the rest of your life. And even if you don't do that crime, you're going to pay for it for the rest of your life. You know, so there's just so much work to happen. You have to want to be there, and you have to want to do it.
One of the things that clinical legal education has done really well, that I actually know that some of you in this room, because I know how you teach and I know how you work, are doing really well, is introducing students to those community organizations through your classes and pairing with those community organizations in your classes, and creating funding to give students opportunities, paid opportunities, to engage in summer work with these entities. When I go and talk to folks, a lot of times I hear fellow academics say, well, we have an internship for credit program in the summer that students can do when they go volunteer to work with this nonprofit who can't pay them. I'm going to be really blunt here, folks. You know who's going to do that internship? Rich white kids. Because I was a poor white kid, and I couldn't do that internship. And so we have to do more as educators to create the space for students to engage with these organizations and to be able to get paid to do it. Because we have students who are from these marginalized groups and who want to work with marginalized groups, but they're taking on massive loans to go to school. Yep. And that pulls them into making financial choices away from the public interest.
That's right.
And so we have to start to think about how we fund these pathways, how we create these pathways, And it's not about giving them a 4-credit opportunity in the summer where they have to pay tuition.
That's right.
It's about giving them the same kind of paid internship experience that they would get if they went to work for a Fortune 500 company or a for-profit company.
That's right.
And so, you know, my message to you is there's a lot of opportunity here, but we've got a lot of work to do.
Thank you. You guys have been great. That's our time. We have a lot of resources that all our panelists have shared on the public interest communications database that Angela has stood up. So feel free to access that there, and they're here for the duration of the conference if you guys have additional questions. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much to the panelists. And yes, the resources, when we put up the slides, which are the background slides, there's a link there to a Google folder, which has resources from the panels, each of the panels. So thank you so much, and we will be back here for our next panel starting right at 3 o'clock.